we'll play a video.
Of Ukraine, the largest invasion of a neighboring country in Europe since World War II.
Hamas has launched a surprise attack within Israel's borders overnight.
Iran gives up to $100 million a year to Hamas.
Xi Jinping says Taiwan will be reunified with China during his New Year's address.
So 2024 must mark an inflection point. We stand at this crossroads, whether to surrender to a sea of troubles or do everything we can to deter.
The growing number of world conflicts and threats have strengthened ties between Moscow and Beijing,
Pledging to shape a new world order.
Xi told Putin that they are driving changes not seen in a century and will provide an alternative to Western influence.
Ebrahim Raisi's visit comes as both China and Iran strengthen their relationships with Russia. Both sides say they're opposed to a world order led by the United States and its allies.
China is by far the most serious challenge to U.S. national security, with the power to reshape the international order to Beijing's liking.
Both the People's Republic of China and Russia have the means to threaten our interests and our way of life.
We're the last real superpower, and now China is a near peer-to-peer adversary to us now. And of course their goal is to rebuild the empire. They're even putting outposts around us. They're buying up farmland in states here in the U.S. And even in some of these localities. We have Chinese CCP-owned companies that are coming in and open shop on Main Street.
An age of idealism has been replaced by a period of hard-headed realism. Old enemies are reanimated, new foes are taking shape, battle lines are being redrawn.
Russia is gathering its forces as it attempts to break Ukrainian defenses across the eastern Donetsk region. Russia is also receiving support from Iran. Ukrainian officials say Moscow has used hundreds of Iranian drones to hit civilian and military targets. And then there's China. The records show that Chinese state-owned companies provided Russian government-owned defense firms with navigation equipment, jamming technology, and jet fighter pods.
Iran has increasingly turned its sights toward China.
China is Iran's biggest trading partner and the only customer of its heavily sanctioned oil exports. Plans made under a 25-year strategic agreement signed in 2021.
According to the New York Times, the agreement calls for joint training and exercises, joint research and weapons development, and intelligence sharing.
And actively deepen defense cooperation with new member Iran.
Iran-backed groups form a land bridge across the Middle East and connect in an alliance that Tehran calls the axis of resistance.
Russian or Chinese firearms, relics from previous wars that made their way into the hands of Hamas.
The foundation of the world order being shaken to their core. To guarantee our freedoms, we must be prepared to deter.
And as we work in concert to meet the authentic problems of our time, we will generate a vision and an energy which will demonstrate anew to the world the superior vitality and the strength of the free society.
Well, thank you. First, a point of order. We have a hard stop at 11, so I'm going to be ruthless in enforcing time limits, beginning with my own. I had a fancy prepared speech, but instead I'd like to tell a story that Secretary Panetta has heard me tell before, which is that when I was a freshman member of Congress with the Secretary's son, Jimmy, we had a meeting of the Problem Solvers Caucus, and we were listening to his wisdom, and I piped up and I said, Mr. Secretary, what was the best job you ever had in Washington, D.C.? And in a response that would simultaneously inspire and depress me, he said, the best job I ever had was being a member of Congress. He was a man who had had every great job in Washington, D.C., and he said the best job he ever had was as a member of Congress because, and I quote him, there was a feeling you could get stuff done. And I'd like to think that at a time when Congress is struggling to get much done, this committee has been an oasis of bipartisanship and at least an attempt to reinvigorate that spirit and that feeling that Secretary Panetta was talking about. We have two incredible public servants with us today, Secretary Pompeo as well, to provide their perspective on how we restore deterrence and meet the moment. And we are in a decisive moment for U.S. national security, for global security more broadly. Famously, Churchill called the period of German rearmament and alliance building the gathering storm. Today, the storm gathers once more, and as we watch China undertake the largest peacetime military buildup since at least World War II, and it finds eager friends in Tehran, Moscow, and Pyongyang, we should reflect on the lessons of history. Problems, this is true in your personal life as much as it is in geopolitics, problems do not age well. We ignore them at our peril. Appeasement or over-reliance on polite diplomacy cannot save us. We must act decisively to enhance our military strength, support our allies, and deter this authoritarian alignment. Only strength will be able to withstand the storm. I now recognize the ranking member, Raja Krishnamoorthi, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming, the distinguished secretaries who are with us today. Until the last few years, a lot of Americans thought that freedom and democracy were finally spreading around the world. After the Cold War, democracy spread from Eastern Europe to East Asia to Sub-Saharan Africa. In the 1990s, some pundits theorized that in addition to the spread of democracy, growing economic ties between countries would also make war less likely. In fact, there was even a theory that it would be impossible for two countries that both had McDonald's to go to war with each other. This was called, and I'm not kidding, this was called, quote, the Golden Arches theory of conflict prevention. And it would look something like this. As you can see in this picture, you can see the Golden Arches, and there's Ronald McDonald conquering the battlefield. Instead of swords being beaten into plowshares, tanks are traded in for, yes, Happy Meals. I like this theory a lot. One reason is that McDonald's is based in my home state of Illinois. And the other reason is that McDonald's was my first real job in life, flipping burgers. So I have a sentimental attachment to this theory. But there's only one thing wrong with this theory, and that is it's false. It doesn't work. Because while the Chinese Communist Party invited McDonald's into China, the CCP did not trade in its tanks for Happy Meals. Instead, in 1989, they sent those tanks into Tiananmen Square, just a few blocks from what would be the largest McDonald's in the world. Vladimir Putin didn't trade in his tanks either and sent them into Ukraine 2 years ago. When McDonald's stopped operating in Russia in protest, Putin forced a sale of McDonald's property and renamed their brand. You can't go to McDonald's in Moscow anymore, but you can go to this place. It's called Vkusna i Tochka, Russian for tasty, and that's it. Economic ties with the CCP and Russia did not lead them to become democracies or to become more peaceful. In fact, the opposite happened. After coming to power, Xi Jinping issued document number 9, which tells the CCP to stamp out, quote, false ideological trends like democracy, universal values, media independence, and civil society. The CCP now jails, disappears, and murders journalists and dissidents, and it's carrying out an ongoing genocide, a genocide against the Uyghur people in Xinjiang province. Beyond its borders, the CCP militarized the South China Sea, and it's increasing its military threat in Taiwan. Xi Jinping declared a, quote, no-limits partnership with Vladimir Putin, and now stands by the Putin regime during its brutal invasion in Ukraine. Last October, President Biden sent Congress a request for additional funding to support Ukraine and others who are defending freedom and democracy against those who wish to tear down these ideals. In November, every single Democrat on this committee signed a letter to congressional leadership urging this body to take action to pass that supplemental funding request. It's now January. The time to pass President Biden's supplemental funding request is now. It's now. The spread of freedom and democracy around the world has been one of recent history's most extraordinary developments. The power of these ideals has been proven by how fiercely those who enjoy them will fight to protect them. Rather than turning their swords into plowshares as they've integrated with the world economy, the CCP and Putin's Russia have bought more swords. Consequently, we must acquire more shields. And we must help our friends shield their democracies from attack as well. Our mutual security depends on it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the ranking member, and I know for the record that your chart and prop game gets better every time we do a hearing. Very impressive. Again, we're privileged to have two public servants, two former secretaries. Secretary Pompeo was Secretary of State and CIA Director during the Trump administration. He also served the 4th District of Kansas in Congress from 2011 to 2017. Secretary Pompeo was the Director of the CIA, as well as the Secretary of Defense under President Barack Obama. He had previously served as Chief of Staff for former President Bill Clinton, and in what was his best job, apparently, as a member of Congress from California from 1977 to 1993. We thank both of you for making time out of your busy schedules to be here. If you could please stand and raise your right hand, I will now swear you in. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. Thank you, Secretary Pompeo. You are recognized for your opening remarks.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Krishnamurti. It's great to be here. Started my career at Canon 107, so it feels like home very much. It's a real privilege to be in front of this particular committee. You all are doing important, remarkable, bipartisan work, and I want to personally, on behalf of the Pompeo family, thank you, each of you, for doing that. It matters to my family. It matters to each American, and I bless you for that. You all have in front of you, much like I did in my time in Congress, important decisions. We have wars raging in Europe, in the Middle East. There's risk of one in South America, much closer to home even. And of course, the topic we're here today to talk about, the challenges in the Pacific and Asia, are in front of us as well. I know that you will endeavor to get these decisions right. To start, I always try to get to the facts. I'm going to try and do this in just 3 minutes. We've got deterrence lost in Europe. We have deterrence lost in the Middle East. We're on the cusp of losing that very deterrent model in Asia as well. One could argue that elements of that have already been lost. Chairman Kim, who I spent way too much time with, Chairman Kim has now talked about the absence of any desire for peaceful reunification with the Republic of Korea. That is a change that is important. I was in Guyana 2 weeks ago. They are frightened by Maduro and his efforts to retake, in his words, much as Xi Jinping talks about reunifying, retake what is rightfully theirs. This is a challenge that is linked. Not just about one of these theaters, one of these zones, one of these regions, but these are all deeply linked to whether America will have the resolve, determination, and capacity to deter and maintain the order that we have benefited, that Americans have benefited from since the post-Cold War order was established. We know that this conflict largely begins with economics. Chinese Communist Party has been at war with the United States economy for at least 20 years. One could argue 40. It might well have made sense for the esteemed Dr. Kissinger to go and travel and open up relationships with the Chinese Communist Party back in 1972. It might have made sense in 1982. It made no sense by 2002, 2012, and certainly today makes no sense. It's dangerous for the United States to allow the Chinese Communist Party to have engaged here at home in ways that undermine the very foundations of our republic. And I know I'll get asked about this today, but I think it's important that when we think of the challenge from the Chinese Communist Party, we think not only about Taiwan, not only about the South Pacific and about the First Island chain, but about Los Angeles and Denver and Washington, D.C., and Chicago and my home state of Kansas. The Chinese Communist Party is working diligently inside the gates to undermine everything it is that we stand for. When he talks about American decline, he is not doing so passively. He is an advocate. He is working to achieve that very American decline here at home. And the last thought, Secretary Panetta, it is great to be with you here today, and I think it's important for America to see that this challenge is not remotely about politics. It is not remotely partisan. It is so much more fundamental than that. I have been critical of many of President Biden's foreign policy actions, but I must say the work that they continue to do to confront the challenge of China, I have approved and appreciated. I always knew that we could do more. They could do more as well, and I'm counting on this committee to help us get to that place. When we put sanctions in place, we can't immediately turn around and create loopholes. When we put in place economic orders that suggest how America ought to proceed, we cannot let our adversaries, whether they be from Russia, escape those sanctions regime, and we have to make sure that our friends comply with them as well. This will require temerity from each of us. The Chinese Communist Party is not about to give in because of some great speech that someone gives, some set of wonderful remarks, or a set of meetings held in San Francisco or Beijing or Washington, D.C. They are determined. They will push back against our actions, and we need to make sure that we hold the Chinese Communist Party at risk in the same way that they seek to put America at risk each day. If we get that piece right, the tactics, the operational pieces, we'll get those. A strong United States military, capable diplomatic corps, and a robust American economy can deliver those outcomes in a way that will give us the chance that 250 years from now, the 76th or 79th Secretary of State can sit here with his Democrat counterpart from a previous administration and still have the opportunity to defend what we hold most sacred. Thanks for giving me the chance to be with you all today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for those great remarks. Secretary Panetta, you are now recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished members of the committee, thanks for inviting me to testify on the increasing threat posed by the People's Republic of China and its ongoing efforts to undermine the United States and allied interests around the world. And thank you for having me join with my good friend, Mike Pompeo, who we worked together when he was in my job as director of the CIA, and continued to be in touch during the time he was Secretary of State. And Mike and I are good friends, and I'm glad that we are here to be able to present our views. I also want to thank this committee. The fact that you are a bipartisan committee working on this issue is incredibly important to our foreign policy. And I want to commend you for the work that you've done, and particularly the report you issued on economic competition. Look, we live in a dangerous world in which tyrants and autocrats and terrorists are challenging and attacking democracies. And so they're threatening our values, they're threatening our interests and our national security. When Putin brutally invaded Ukraine, it was for no other reason but that he did not believe the people of Ukraine had the right to decide how to govern themselves. I believe Ukraine is fighting not just to protect their democracy, but to protect the concept of democracy in the 21st century. When Hamas attacked and brutally killed innocent men, women, and children in Israel, they, like al-Qaeda on 9/11, made clear that they had no regard for the dignity of life. And Hamas's leadership does need to be destroyed, just as we targeted and destroyed al-Qaeda leadership. We are facing an aligned group of dictators and autocrats from around the world, united in their determination to undermine our democracy. China is exploiting these conflicts to advance its own narrative of Western decline. She explicitly said the East is rising and the West is declining, and that China will replace the United States as a world power. I've met with Xi multiple times during the time I was in office, here and in Beijing. He's smart, he can be very diplomatic, he's committed to an aggressive China. But it is important that we never underestimate Xi Jinping, because he will use every opportunity to undermine the stability of the United States and the West. He will steal our intellectual property, conduct economic espionage, have extensive intelligence. I believe they've planted malware within our own computer networks. He will use artificial intelligence for disinformation campaigns. He will continue to militarize the South China Sea. He will modernize the People's Liberation Army They have the largest Navy. They're producing large numbers of manned and unmanned aircraft, ICBMs. They're expanding their nuclear arsenal. They have 500 warheads, and they hope to double that by the end of the decade. As a result, they are not simply developing what could be called a general purpose military. They're developing a military that can employ the threat and the use of force. Xi Jinping recently said the reunification of the motherland is a historical necessity. And so there's no question they threaten Taiwan. The president was correct to say that we will defend Taiwan militarily if it comes to that. I have always believed strongly that when the U.S. gives its word, it must stand by its word. That is the essence of deterrence. The bottom line is we are facing an increasingly aligned group of autocrats around the world. And the fact is that they are now having dual-use technologies that are being spread with Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. While this alignment of autocrats is troubling, the good news is that it does not even come close to approaching the strength and depth and breadth of the United States' global network of allies and partners. Look, some have suggested that our relationship with China is improving, and there's no question we've had increased military and economic dialogue. But make no mistake, the only way to try to avoid war with China, the only way to deal with China is from strength. From strength. Both China and Russia became more aggressive when they sensed weakness on the part of the U.S. And for that reason, we must take strong action to arm and train Taiwan to defend itself, to strengthen our force posture, to invest in the next generation of military technology, to bolster our alliances, and to maintain strong export controls on critical technologies. And I must say, we must demonstrate that our democracy is strong and that we can govern. For that reason, it is incredibly important that this Congress pass the supplemental request and provide necessary military aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. To fail would send a terrible message of weakness to adversaries and allies alike. We'll be playing China's game. And let me make clear that those who believe the United States can simply back away from our commitment in Ukraine, you cannot be weak on Ukraine and be tough on China. In conclusion, let me just say, I tell the students at the Panetta Institute that in our democracy, we govern either by leadership or by crisis. If we fail to provide leadership, then we will govern by crisis. And the price of that is the loss of the trust of the American people in our democracy. This committee provides hope that we can govern and work together in a real sense. Our democracy and our national security depend on each of you for your leadership necessary to govern and protect our country.